I took the job because I needed the money and because nobody else wanted it. The park had been officially closed for 3 years. Budget cuts, they said. Structural concerns with the visitor center, environmental remediation in progress. The usual bureaucratic language that meant nothing and everything. But the federal government still owned the land, and federal land requires monitoring, even when the public can't access it. Especially then. The regional office sent me a packet 3 weeks before my start date. Inside were keys, maps, a radio frequency list, and a personnel file so thin I could see through the envelope. My supervisor would be a man named Cruz. He'd meet me at the southern gate at 5:30 in the afternoon on a Thursday in October. I'd work alone Thursday through Monday, dawn to dawn. 48 hours on, 96 off. The pay was almost double what I'd made at the lumber yard. I drove up on a clear afternoon with 2 duffel bags and a cooler. The highway turned to county road to gravel, gravel to something that was barely a road at all. The southern gate was a rusted cattle guard with a chain-link span pushed open just wide enough for a truck. Cruz was waiting beside a green Park Service pickup that looked older than I was. He was maybe 60, with a gray beard and the kind of deep tan that comes from decades outdoors. He didn't offer his hand. "You're early?" he said when traffic was light. He looked at my truck, then at me. "You read the packet?" "Yes. Read it again tonight, all of it. There's a section at the back you probably skipped. Don't skip it." I nodded. He reached into his pickup and handed me a laminated card, the kind you'd clip to a belt. It had a list of radio channels and a short block of text I couldn't read in the dimming light. "Visitor center's 4 miles in, you'll see the turnoff. There's a ranger station behind it, past the maintenance shed. That's where you'll stay. Generator's full. Propane tank's 3/4. Don't use the main building after dark." "Why not?" "It's in the rules." He gestured to the card. "Everything's in the rules. You follow them, you'll be fine. You don't, you won't finish the weekend." He climbed into his truck, then paused with the door open. "One more thing. If someone radios you and uses your first name, don't respond. If they use your last name, respond once and only once. If they use both, turn the radio off and don't turn it back on until dawn." Who would be radioing me? I thought the park was closed. "It is." He shut the door and drove off before I could ask anything else. The road in was worse than the access road. Potholes deep enough to bottom out my suspension, branches scraping both sides of the truck. The forest pressed in close, all pine and oak and something with white bark that looked sick in the fading light. I passed a shuttered restroom, a picnic area with tables chained together, a trail marker hanging by one bolt. The visitor center appeared around a bend, a low brick building with dark windows and a parking lot full of leaves. The turnoff to the ranger station was exactly where Cruz said it would be, a narrow track that curved behind the maintenance shed and ended at a small cabin with peeling green paint. Inside was basic. Kitchenette, cot, desk, 2-way radio mounted to the wall, a wood stove, and a gun safe I didn't have the combination for. The laminated card Cruz gave me was clipped to the radio with a carabiner. I set my bags down and opened the packet again. The section at the back was titled Operational Protocols. It was 8 pages, single-spaced. I made coffee and read it twice. The rules started simply. 1. Between the hours of 6 in the evening and 6 in the morning, remain inside the ranger station unless conducting a scheduled patrol. 2. Patrols are conducted at 9:30 in the evening, 1:45 in the morning, and 4:50 in the morning. Each patrol follows the yellow trail markers only. Total distance is 2.3 miles. Duration should not exceed 50 minutes. 3. Carry the radio, flashlight, and whistle at all times during patrols. Do not carry a firearm. 4. If you see lights in the visitor center, do not investigate. Note the time in which windows are illuminated. report via radio on Channel 3. 5. If you see lights in the maintenance shed, proceed immediately to the ranger station and lock all doors and windows. Do not report via radio. 6. If you hear knocking at the ranger station door, check your watch. If it is between 10 in the evening and 5 in the morning, do not answer. Do not look through the window. Remain silent until the knocking stops. 7. If the knocking continues for more than 12 minutes, respond once by saying, "Service hours are 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Do not say anything else. Do not open the door. 8. During patrols, if you encounter a person on the trail, greet them once and continue walking. Do not stop. Do not ask questions. Do not accept anything they offer. 9. If the person follows you for more than 200 yards, use the whistle 3 times. Wait 30 seconds. If they are still following, leave the trail and return directly to the ranger station using the access road. 10. At 12:15 a.m., check the propane tank behind the ranger station. If the valve has been turned off, turn it back on. If the valve is missing, do not use the stove or heater for the remainder of the shift. 11. The radio must remain on Channel 6 at all times except when reporting on Channel 3. If you receive a transmission on Channel 6 that consists only of static or breathing, do not respond. Change to Channel 4 for 10 minutes, then return to Channel 6. 12. If you find the front door to the ranger station unlocked when you return from patrol, do not enter. Wait outside until dawn. Report to crews immediately. 13. Do not use the bathroom in the visitor center. Do not use the bathroom in the maintenance shed. Use only the ranger station facilities. 14. If you see a dog on the property, do not approach it. Dogs are not permitted in the park and have not been for 3 years. I read them a third time, then checked my watch. 6:40 in the evening. The sun had set while I was reading, and the forest outside had gone dark in that sudden way it does in October. I locked the door and tested the windows. All secure. The generator hummed outside, a steady mechanical sound that was almost comforting. I ate a sandwich, unpacked my clothes, and tried not to think about Rule 12. At 9:15, I clipped the radio to my belt, grabbed the flashlight and whistle, and stepped outside. The yellow trail markers were easy to follow. Reflective diamonds nailed to trees every 30 yards, glowing bright in my flashlight beam. The trail looped through the forest east of the visitor center, crossed a dry creek bed, skirted the edge of what the map called the North Meadow, and returned via a fire road that merged with the access road 50 yards from the ranger station. The first patrol was quiet. My boots crunched on gravel and pine needles. Something small moved in the underbrush to my left, probably a raccoon. The air smelled like wood smoke, though I hadn't seen any smoke. At the creek bed, I paused. The trail crossed at a narrow point marked by a cairn of stacked stones. On the far side, the yellow markers continued into a section of forest where the trees grew closer together. My flashlight beam didn't penetrate far. I checked my watch. 9:38. I was making good time. I crossed the creek bed and continued. The trail rose slightly, following the contour of a low ridge. Through the trees to my right, I could see a faint glow that might have been the visitor center's parking lot lights, though I didn't remember seeing any lights when I arrived. At 9:52, I reached the North Meadow. It was bigger than I expected, maybe 200 yards across, covered in tall grass that swayed in a wind I couldn't feel. The trail ran along the western edge. I kept to the markers. Halfway across, I heard footsteps behind me. I stopped and turned. My flashlight showed nothing but grass and trail. I waited 30 seconds listening. The footsteps had stopped when I stopped. I started walking again. The footsteps resumed, matching my pace exactly. I walked faster. The footsteps stayed with me, always the same distance back, maybe 20 yards. I reached the far end of the meadow and checked over my shoulder again. Nothing. The trail entered the forest and merged with the fire road. I kept my hand on the whistle but didn't use it. The footsteps faded as I reached the access road. I was back at the ranger station at 10:19, 49 minutes total. I locked the door and stood at the window watching the tree line. Nothing moved. I checked the propane tank at 12:15. The valve was on. I returned inside and sat at the desk, listening to the radio hiss on Channel 6. At 1:30, I made another pot of coffee. At 1:45, I started the second patrol. The second patrol was worse. The trail was the same. The markers were the same. But the forest felt different, like the space between the trees had narrowed. My flashlight beam seemed dimmer, though I'd checked the batteries before leaving. I crossed the creek bed without incident. The cairn was still there, stones stacked in the same precarious tower. I continued up the ridge. At 2:04, I heard singing. It was faint, coming from somewhere ahead and to the left off the trail. A woman's voice, high and clear, singing something I didn't recognize. No words, just a melody that circled back on itself. I stopped walking. The singing continued. It didn't get closer or farther away. I checked the rules in my head. Nothing about singing, nothing about voices in the forest. I kept walking, focusing on the yellow markers. The singing followed me to the north meadow and stopped. The meadow was silent. The grass was still. I walked quickly along the western edge, keeping my flashlight trained on the trail. My breath misted in the cold air. At 2:28, I saw the first light. It was in the visitor center, just visible through the trees to my right. A pale yellowish glow in one of the ground floor windows. As I watched, it moved to another window, then another, like someone walking through the building with a lantern. I noted the time in the windows. Second and third from the left, ground floor, south side. I didn't stop walking. The light disappeared as I reached the fire road. I continued to the ranger station, locked the door, and picked up the radio. Base to supervisor, channel 3. I switched to channel 3 and waited. Static, then crew's voice, rough with sleep. Go ahead. Lights in the visitor center, south side, ground floor, second and third windows from the left. Time was 2:28 a.m. Noted. Return to channel 6. Understood. I switched back. The radio hissed softly. I sat at the desk and waited for my hands to stop shaking. The knocking started at 3:18. 6 sharp raps evenly spaced on the front door. I checked my watch and stayed in my chair. The knocking came again, same rhythm, same intensity. I counted the seconds. At 4 minutes, the knocking paused. At 6 minutes, it resumed, louder now. At 10 minutes, I heard a voice. Hello? Is anyone there? I need help. It sounded like a young man, maybe 20, with a slight southern accent. Polite, concerned, exactly the kind of voice you'd want to help. I checked my watch. 11 minutes. I stayed silent. At 12 minutes and 30 seconds, the knocking stopped. I heard footsteps moving away from the door, circling toward the back of the ranger station. They paused at the window near the kitchenette, then continued around to the propane tank. I went to the desk and turned off the lights. In the darkness, I could see a faint shape outside the window, backlit by the generator's glow. It stood there for maybe a minute, not moving, then walked back toward the forest. I waited another 10 minutes before turning the lights back on. At 4:30, I checked the propane tank. The valve was still on. I returned inside and prepared for the third patrol. The third patrol was the longest. I left at 4:50, later than scheduled, because I'd spent 5 minutes staring at the door, working up the nerve to open it. The forest was still dark, though the sky to the east was starting to gray. The trail was empty. The markers were where they should be. I crossed the creek bed and climbed the ridge, moving quickly, eager to finish. At the north meadow, I saw the dog. It was sitting in the center of the trail, maybe 40 yards ahead. A large dog, dark fur, watching me. It didn't bark or growl, it just sat there, perfectly still. I stopped walking. The dog tilted its head, then stood and walked off the trail into the grass. It moved wrong, like its front legs and back legs weren't coordinated. It disappeared into the meadow. I stayed on the trail and walked faster. My hand was on the whistle, but I didn't use it. The dog didn't reappear. I reached the fire road at 5:26. The sky was lighter now, the trees visible as black shapes against gray. I could hear birds starting to wake. At the ranger station, I unlocked the door and went inside. I made coffee and sat at the desk, watching the window. At 6:03, the sun came up. The weekend continued in the same pattern. Patrols at 9:30, 1:45, and 4:50. Lights in the visitor center every night, always moving, sometimes on the second floor. Knocking at the door between 3 and 4 in the morning. Different voices each time. Once a woman asking for directions. Once a child asking for his mother. Once someone who didn't speak just knocked in sets of 3 for 16 minutes straight. I followed the rules exactly. I reported the lights on Channel 3. I stayed silent during the knocking. I avoided people on the trail, though I only saw them twice more. Once a man in a ranger uniform that looked older than Cruz's truck. Once a woman in a white dress walking barefoot near the creek bed. I greeted them both and kept moving. On Sunday night, I found a new document slipped under the door. It was a single page typed on the same paper as the operational protocols. The heading read, Additional Guidance. 15. If you smell smoke during a patrol, stop walking and count to 30. If the smell persists, leave the trail and return to the ranger station immediately. Do not look for the source of the smoke. 16. If you hear your name called during a patrol, do not respond and do not stop walking. If you hear your name called 3 times, use the whistle once and continue to the ranger station. 17. At 3:30 a.m., check the lock on the maintenance shed. If the door is open, close it. If the door is locked but you hear sounds from inside, do not investigate. Return to the ranger station. 18. If you find an object on the trail that was not there during the previous patrol, do not touch it. Step over it and continue. Note the location and report after dawn. 19. If the radio transmits your voice when you are not speaking, turn it off immediately. Do not turn it back on until the next scheduled patrol. 20. Do not count the yellow trail markers. Do not attempt to verify the total number. If you find yourself counting them, stop immediately and recite your date of birth aloud. I read the document 3 times, then filed it with the original protocols. That night I smelled smoke near the North Meadow and counted to 30. The smell faded. I continued the patrol. On Monday I heard my name called twice while crossing the creek bed. A voice that sounded like my sister's, though my sister lived in Tennessee and I hadn't spoken to her in 2 years. I didn't respond. The voice didn't call a 3rd time. At dawn on Tuesday, Cruz arrived with supplies and my paycheck. "Any problems?" he asked. "Lights in the visitor center every night, knocking at the door, someone walking the trails." "You follow the protocols?" "Yes." "Then no problems." He handed me a box of batteries and a new propane tank. "You coming back Thursday?" I looked at the forest, then at the ranger station. The sun was up and everything looked normal. Just trees and buildings and gravel roads. "Yeah," I said, "I'll be back." He nodded and climbed into his truck. I drove home, slept for 12 hours, and didn't tell anyone where I'd been. The second weekend was harder. I arrived Thursday at 5:30. Cruz was waiting with a new document, 3 pages this time. Emergency Protocols, the heading read, for use during adverse conditions only. "Storm coming in Saturday night," he said. "You'll need these." I took the document. "What kind of storm?" "The kind where you stay inside." He tapped the paper. "Read it tonight. All of it. Don't improvise." He left before I could ask what adverse conditions meant. Inside the ranger station, I made coffee and read the new protocols. Emergency Protocol 1. If winds exceed 40 miles per hour or visibility drops below 50 yards, suspend all patrols. Remain inside the ranger station with doors and windows locked. Emergency Protocol 2. If power to the generator fails, do not attempt to restart it until dawn. Use the battery-powered lantern only. Do not use candles or open flames. Emergency Protocol 3. If you hear knocking during a storm, do not respond regardless of duration. If the knocking becomes pounding, move to the back room and close the interior door. Remain there until the pounding stops. Emergency Protocol 4. If you see figures moving outside during a storm, close all curtains and do not look out windows for the remainder of the night. If a figure attempts to communicate through a window, recite the following phrase aloud 3 times. This facility is closed for maintenance. Do not deviate from this phrase. Emergency Protocol 5. If the storm lasts past dawn, remain inside until crews makes radio contact. Do not exit the ranger station for any reason, including propane checks or perimeter assessment. I read it twice more, then filed it with the others. The first 2 nights were routine, patrols at the scheduled times, lights in the visitor center, knocking at 3 in the morning, a woman's voice asking if anyone was home. I stayed silent. She left after 9 minutes. On Saturday, the wind picked up around noon. By 4 in the afternoon, the trees were bending and I could hear branches cracking in the forest. By 6, it was dark as midnight, the sky a low gray ceiling that seemed to press down on the ranger station. The generator died at 7:42. I sat in the darkness and waited for my eyes to adjust. The wind howled outside, a constant roar that made the walls shake. I found the battery-powered lantern under the sink and set it on the desk. At 8:30, the knocking started. It was louder than before, harder, like someone hitting the door with a closed fist. I checked my watch and stayed in my chair. The knocking continued, steady and insistent, for 6 minutes. Then it moved to the window, then to the back door, then back to the front. At 9:15, it became pounding. Deep, booming impacts that rattled the hinges. I grabbed the lantern and moved to the back room, a narrow space barely big enough for a cot and a shelf. I closed the door and sat on the floor with my back against the wall. The pounding continued for an hour. Then it stopped. I waited in the silence, counting my breaths. At 11:30, I heard voices outside. Multiple voices overlapping, some shouting, some whispering. I couldn't make out words. At midnight, someone tried the door handle. I heard it rattle, then stop. Then rattle again, faster, like someone was shaking it as hard as they could. The door held. At 12:45, the voices stopped. The wind dropped to a low moan. I stayed in the back room until 3 in the morning, then crept to the front window and looked out. The generator light was on. The yard was empty, the forest was still. I checked the propane tank at 3:30. The valve was on. The maintenance shed door was closed and locked. I returned inside and sat at the desk until dawn. At 6:15, the radio crackled. Supervisor to base, channel 6. I grabbed the handset. Go ahead. Storm's passed. You intact? Yes. Generator? Running now. Good. I'll be there at noon. Don't go outside until then. Understood? I made coffee and waited. Crews arrived with 2 men I didn't recognize. They inspected the generator, checked the locks, and walked the perimeter. I stayed inside. After 20 minutes, Cruz knocked and I let him in. You did good, he said. Most people don't make it through a storm. What happens to the ones who don't? He looked at me for a long moment. They stopped following the rules. One of the men outside called his name. Cruz went to the door, spoke briefly, then returned. We found something on the trail near the North Meadow. You leave anything out there? No. Describe what you saw on your last patrol before the storm, I thought back. Yellow markers, grass, nothing unusual. You sure? Yes, he nodded slowly. There's a backpack out there now, blue with orange straps. It wasn't there Friday night. We're going to remove it. You see anything else appear on the trails, you report it immediately. Don't wait for dawn. What's in the backpack? Nothing you need to know about. He handed me an envelope. Your pay. You coming back Thursday? I looked at the envelope, then at the forest outside the window. The trees were still, the sky clear. It looked peaceful. Yeah, I said, I'll be back. The third weekend was quiet until Sunday night. I ran the patrols without incident, saw lights in the visitor center twice, heard knocking on Friday and Saturday, both times stopping before 12 minutes. Found a small cairn of stones on the trail Saturday night that hadn't been there Friday. I noted the location and reported after dawn. On Sunday at 1:45, I started the second patrol and saw the person in the meadow. She was standing in the center of the grass, maybe 30 yards from the trail. A woman in dark clothes, her back to me. She wasn't moving. I kept walking, watching her from the corner of my eye. As I drew level with her position, she turned. Her face was pale in my flashlight beam, her eyes dark. She smiled. "Excuse me," she said. "Can you help me?" I greeted her once and kept walking. She started following. I checked over my shoulder every 20 yards. She stayed the same distance back, matching my pace exactly. At the edge of the meadow, I counted steps. 50 yards, 100, 150, 200. I used the whistle 3 times and waited 30 seconds. She stopped walking but didn't leave the trail. I could see her silhouette against the gray sky, arms at her sides, head tilted like she was listening. I left the trail and cut through the forest toward the access road. Branches caught my jacket. My boots slipped on wet leaves. I moved as quickly as I could without running, checking behind me every few seconds. The woman didn't follow. By the time I reached the access road, she was gone. I returned to the ranger station at 2:36. I locked the door and stood at the window, breathing hard. The radio crackled. "Base, this is Supervisor Channel 6. I grabbed the handset. "Go ahead." "You deviate from the patrol route?" "Yes, encountered a follower, used the whistle and returned via access road." "Describe the follower." "Woman, dark clothes, pale face. She spoke to me, asked for help." There was a long pause. "She's still following?" I checked the window. "No." "Good. Stay inside until dawn. No more patrols tonight." "Understood." The radio went silent. I made coffee and sat at the desk, watching the tree line until the sun came up. The fourth weekend, Cruz met me with a new document. Revised protocols, the heading read, 21. If a follower stops pursuing you after whistle use but remains visible on the trail, do not resume the patrol. Return to the ranger station and report immediately. 22. If you find tracks in the dirt near the ranger station that do not match your boots, take a photograph with the provided camera and report after dawn. Do not attempt to follow the tracks. 23. If the radio transmits a conversation between 2 or more people, listen but do not speak. Note the time and duration. Report after dawn. 24. Do not photograph the visitor center. Do not photograph the maintenance shed. Do not photograph the forest after dark. 25. If you feel compelled to leave the trail during a patrol for any reason other than a follower, stop walking and recite your full name and date of birth aloud. If the compulsion persists, return to the ranger station immediately. Getting more specific, I said. Cruz nodded. Patterns develop, we adjust. How long has this park been closed? 3 years. And before that? It was open. He looked at the forest. Then it wasn't safe anymore, then we closed it. Then we learned the rules. Learned from who? people who didn't make it through their shifts. He handed me a camera, a cheap digital model with a neck strap. "You'll be fine. Just follow the protocols." He left. I went inside and filed the new document with the others. That weekend I found tracks outside the ranger station on Friday morning. Bare feet, adult-sized, leading from the forest to the propane tank and back. I photographed them and reported after dawn. Cruz said he'd send someone to check, but no one came. On Saturday night, the radio transmitted a conversation at 2:33 in the morning. Two men discussing something about the north access and securing the fence line. They spoke for 4 minutes, their voices calm and professional, like park rangers on a normal shift. I noted the time and duration. When I reported it Sunday morning, Cruz told me to disregard any radio traffic that wasn't directed specifically to me. On Monday at 4:50, during the last patrol, I felt compelled to leave the trail near the creek bed. A strong, irrational certainty that I needed to walk into the forest, toward the smell of smoke I'd been smelling on and off for weeks. I stopped walking and recited my name and date of birth 3 times. The compulsion faded. I continued the patrol. At dawn, I packed my truck and waited for Cruz. "You coming back Thursday?" he asked. I looked at him, then at the ranger station. "How many people have done this job? Since we closed the park, you're the 4th. What happened to the first 3? First one quit after 2 weeks. Second one broke a rule and disappeared. Third one made it 6 months, then stopped showing up. We found his truck at the southern gate with the keys still in it. And you think I'll do better? You've made it a month. That's longer than most." He handed me my pay. "You follow the rules, you'll be fine." I drove home and spent 3 days not thinking about the forest. On Thursday, I drove back. The 5th weekend, something changed. I arrived at the ranger station and found the door unlocked. Not open, just unlocked. The bolt was still extended, but the handle turned freely. I stood outside for 5 minutes, checking the windows. Everything looked normal. The interior was dark and still. I tried to remember if I'd locked the door when I left Monday morning. I always locked the door. Always. Rule 12. If you find the front door unlocked when you return from patrol, do not enter. Wait outside until dawn. But this wasn't a return from patrol. This was arrival before shift. The rule didn't specify. I opened the door and went inside. The ranger station looked exactly as I'd left it. Clean, organized, nothing out of place. The radio was on the correct channel. The propane tank was full. The emergency protocols were filed neatly on the desk. I checked every room, every window, every lock. Everything was secure. I made coffee and tried to convince myself it didn't matter. At 9:30, I started the first patrol. The trail was empty. The markers were bright. I crossed the creek bed and climbed the ridge without incident. At the north meadow, I paused. The grass was shorter than I remembered, like something had been grazing on it. I kept to the trail. At 10:18, I heard singing again. The same high, wordless melody I'd heard weeks ago. It was coming from deeper in the forest east of the meadow. I didn't stop walking. At 10:43, I smelled smoke. I stopped and counted to 30. The smell didn't fade. It got stronger, sharp, and acrid like burning plastic. I left the trail and headed for the access road. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Multiple sets moving quickly. I didn't look back. I reached the access road and ran the last 100 yards to the ranger station. Inside, I locked the door and checked the windows. The forest was dark and still. No movement, no lights, no smoke. The footsteps had stopped. I picked up the radio. Base to supervisor, channel 3. Static, then Cruz's voice. "Go ahead." Aborted patrol due to persistent smoke smell and multiple followers. Time was 10:43 p.m. "You back at the station?" "Yes." "Stay inside. No more patrols tonight." "Understood." I switched back to channel 6 and waited. At midnight, the knocking started. It was different this time. Not random, not frantic, methodical. 6 knocks, pause, 6 knocks, pause. Always the same rhythm, always the same intensity. It continued for an hour. At 1:15, I heard glass breaking. Not at the ranger station. Somewhere outside, distant but clear. I went to the window and looked toward the visitor center. Every window on the ground floor was illuminated, bright yellow light pouring into the parking lot. I grabbed the radio. Base to supervisor, channel 3. Go ahead. All ground floor windows in visitor center are illuminated. Time is 1:16 a.m. I heard glass breaking approximately 1 minute ago. There was a long pause. Stay inside. Do not investigate. I'm on my way. Understood. I switched back to channel 6 and watched the visitor center. The lights stayed on. At 1:45, I saw figures moving past the windows. 3, maybe 4. They moved slowly, deliberately, like they were searching for something. At 2:30, Cruz's truck pulled into the parking lot. He parked near the visitor center and got out with a flashlight. I watched him walk to the building, try the door, then circle the perimeter. He returned to his truck and drove to the ranger station. I opened the door. He looked tired. Anything else happen? He asked. Just the lights. Glass break from inside or outside? I couldn't tell. He nodded. I'm going to check the building. You stay here. If I'm not back in 30 minutes, get in your truck and drive to the southern gate. Don't stop, don't look back. Someone will meet you there. What's in the visitor center? Nothing you want to see. He handed me his radio. Channel 3, 30 minutes. He walked back to the visitor center and went inside. The lights stayed on. I watched the windows and counted the minutes. At 28 minutes, he came back out. He was walking quickly, almost running. He got in his truck and drove to the ranger station. We're updating the protocols, he said. As of now, the visitor center is off limits for any reason. Don't report lights anymore. Don't look at it after dark. Pretend it doesn't exist. What did you see? Nothing that matters. He looked at the forest. You did good tonight. Following the rules, calling it in. That's what keeps you safe. What happens if I don't follow the rules? He met my eyes. You end up like the second ranger. You want that? No. Then keep doing what you're doing. He climbed into his truck. I'll be back at dawn. Don't leave the station. He drove off. I went inside and locked the door. The knocking started again at 3:18. This time it lasted until dawn. The 6th weekend, Cruz brought the final document. Emergency Amendment, the heading read, 26. Do not look at the visitor center between the hours of 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. If you must move past it, keep your eyes on the trail or access road. If you see movement in your peripheral vision, do not turn your head. 27. If you hear voices calling your name from multiple directions simultaneously, close all curtains, turn off all lights, and remain silent until the voices stop. Do not use the radio during this time. 28. If you find the yellow trail markers removed or rearranged, do not attempt to follow the trail. Return to the ranger station and report after dawn. 29. At exactly 3 a.m., check all door and window locks. If any lock has been tampered with, do not attempt to repair it. Move to the back room and remain there until dawn. 30. If Cruz does not make contact within 48 hours of your scheduled arrival, secure the ranger station and leave the property. Do not return. These are the final rules, Cruz said. You learn these, you're done. No more updates. What if something happens that isn't covered? Use your best judgment. But if your best judgment says to leave, then leave. He looked at the ranger station. You've done 5 weekends. That's more than anyone else. You want to stop? I'll understand. I thought about the money, about my debts, about the fact that I'd followed every rule and nothing had touched me. I'll finish the month, I said. He nodded. Good, just remember. The rules exist because people learn the hard way. You follow them, you'll be fine. That weekend, I heard voices calling my name at 2:43 on Saturday morning. Multiple continue voices from the forest, from the visitor center, from somewhere above. I closed the curtains, turned off the lights, and sat in darkness for 40 minutes. On Sunday, during the first patrol, I found 3 yellow markers on the ground near the creek bed. They'd been pried off the trees and stacked neatly on the trail. I turned around and went back to the ranger station. At 3 a.m. Monday, I checked the locks. The back door handle was loose, like someone had been working on it with a tool. I moved to the back room and stayed there until dawn. When Cruz arrived Tuesday morning, I told him everything. "You did exactly right," he said, "every time." "Is it getting worse?" "No, you're just noticing more." He handed me my pay. "Same time Thursday?" I looked at the envelope, then at the forest. The sun was up, the birds were singing, the trees were just trees. "Yeah," I said. "Same time." The 7th weekend was my last. Not because something happened, not because I broke a rule, because I'd decided that a month was enough, and because Cruz agreed when I told him Thursday afternoon. "You made it longer than most," he said. "You want a recommendation? I'll write you one." "What happens to the park now?" "We'll find someone else, or we won't. The park will still be here either way." I spent the weekend following every rule exactly as written. Patrols at 9:30, 1:45, and 4:50. Propane checks at 12:15 and 3:30. No looking at the visitor center. No responding to knocking. No investigating sounds or lights or voices. On Sunday night during the last patrol, I walked the trail slowly, memorizing the markers and the turns. At the North Meadow, I stopped and looked at the grass. It was even shorter now, almost bare in some places. I wondered what had been eating it, then decided I didn't want to know. At the ranger station, I packed my things and cleaned the kitchen. I filed all the protocols in the desk drawer and left the radio on Channel 6. At dawn Monday, Cruz arrived with a woman I didn't recognize. She was maybe 30, with short, dark hair and the kind of alert expression that told me she'd already read the protocols. "This is Porter," Cruz said. "She's taking over." I shook her hand. "Follow the rules," I said. "All of them, exactly." "I will. Don't improvise, don't test them, don't assume you know better." "I understand." I looked at Cruz. "She ready for this?" "Nobody's ready," he said, "but she'll learn." I climbed into my truck and drove to the southern gate. In the rearview mirror, the ranger station disappeared behind the trees. I kept driving until I hit the highway, then kept going until I was home. I never went back. But sometimes, late at night, I think about Porter, about whether she followed the rules, about whether she made it through her first weekend or her first month, about whether she's still there, walking the yellow markers, checking the propane tank, listening to the knocking at 3 in the morning. And I think about the rules, about how they started simple and grew more complex, about how each new rule was written because someone learned something the hard way, about how the list would keep growing, weekend after weekend, as long as someone was there to write them down. I hope Porter's writing them down. I hope she's following them. I hope she's learning what I learned. The rules exist for a reason, and the reason is still out there in the forest waiting for someone to break them.